Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who I can see are here on time. This is fantastic. I can see a lot of people already in the room. I am super excited about today's webinar, but the most exciting thing I think is that out of every webinar I've done in recent memory, this one seems to have really ignited a lot of interest from the audience. I've had messages, I've had in-person meetings where people have told me they've signed up and they're really excited about this session. I think that there is a recognition that it is time, everyone, that this pharmaceutical industry that we are all knowing and loving and very much part of our lives does no longer sit on the sidelines and indeed embraces that very thorny nettle and actually works out what we do about this phenomenon known as misinformation. So today's title is called Doctor Truths, and the reason we chose that title is it's also the name of a report, which I will cover in a few moments. But the tagline hopefully informs you: the misinformation illness you can't cure with medicine. And that's really the point. We can't bury our heads in the sand, particularly if we describe ourselves as patient-centric or caring about patient outcomes. When there's such a huge elephant in the room that is this misinformation phenomenon, I don't think that any of us should be able to sleep at night thinking that we're doing a good job unless we are actually doing something about this, whether upfront or indirectly or subtly behind the scenes. It doesn't matter in many ways the approach that we take, but that we are indeed trying to do something so that at least we can sit comfortably and sleep at night knowing that we're doing what we can. It's kind of a hidden pandemic, I would argue. It's genuinely reshaping healthcare. And it's not obviously a virus in the traditional sense, but actually much of the behavior of it could be described as virus-like. And it is rewriting the behavior that patients take. It's eroding the trust in experts. I would even argue that it is making the once infallible goal of being high-minded with scientific prowess question marked, probably for the first time ever, really, certainly in our lifetimes anyway. So this webinar is super important. I think it's time to not just expose how that misinformation has infiltrated our everyday decisions and everyday understanding, but the urgent question of what we do about it. Well, the good news is that I am joined by some fantastic panelists who I'm going to introduce in a second. But before I do that, I'm actually going to ask for two things. Firstly, get that chat window out. Please say hello. I want you to, every single person watching this webinar, to introduce themselves, to tell us where you're dialing in from, and maybe, if you can, a little sentence on why you decided to come to this webinar, what you're really interested in finding out about. So I don't want anyone really sitting on the sidelines because that is exactly what our industry has been guilty of so far. I would also really like for you guys to look at your screen because I'm going to get one of our little poll questions going from the outset. And this poll is called, Where Are You Now? I'm doing this one before sharing any information because I want to know where everybody sits today before being influenced by the conversation. You can see it's a three-part question. How big a threat do you believe misinformation poses to healthcare today? Second one, what's the level of exposure to misinformation that you've witnessed in your personal life? And you can see I've got some levels there. So choose the highest level that you've personally experienced, right the way from being affected directly yourself, all the way down to not really seeing it at all. And then finally, how confident are you that your company or pharma in general, if you don't work for a pharma company, truly understands how this misinformation actually spreads and proliferates? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that whilst I move on. What I'd actually like to do is I'm going to start with the video, actually, if that's all right. So I'm cueing my colleague Lorna, who's sitting over from me. And I'd like us to just take a quick look at this video, which I think tells us a lot.
I didn't know where
Where to start? But I had
to know more. I typed the words
that kept
me awake. I just
wanted an answer.
anything to make sense of it. Sometimes what I found felt right. Sometimes it felt too good to
To
be
be true. That time, it was just what I was looking for.
Their posts gave me hope, something to hold on to, something to question.
Something to start a conversation. So I searched again, not really to learn, but to confirm. To find the facts that fit.
The stories I wanted to believe. The more I searched, the more I found.
The more I posted, the more it spread.
Each answer led to another question.
Each post led to another. Until
It felt like there was no going back.
Like, comment. I was just following it, or maybe feeding it. Every choice, every click comes with a cost.
Well, you thought Halloween was actually next week, but maybe it's already here. I think that was a fantastic video, and kudos to the team at Have Us Links for putting that together. And super excited that, as you'll see coming up in a moment, we are joined by two experts from Have Us Links on this Indeed webinar. Now, have you downloaded the report? I personally read the report last week and found it really quite moving. So moving that I thought I would share with you to introduce this topic some of the biggest reflections that I had. And then, of course, we will move on to further reflections from Have Us Links on some of the most incredible findings. I'm going to stop the poll in about 1 minute, so make sure you've answered that. I think about 80% of you have. What were my standout moments from the report? Number one, misinformation is not something in a corner somewhere. It is absolutely mainstream. And I think you're going to see that when I show you the poll results as well in a minute. It's no longer confined to alternative channels. It's actually right up front, and it affects most of us. Misinformation is not the whole truth. Partial truths actually outperform outright lies, and they outperform the truth as well. It's like that halfway house is the most dangerous form. Stuff that sounds credible, maybe has elements of credibility in it, but then skews it or reframes it, often with an emotional slant that makes it more shareable and more divisive. Farmers' silence is harmful. Yes, doing nothing is sometimes worse than doing something, and this is one of those instances. The industry's hesitancy creates a vacuum of information. That vacuum is being filled by louder and more persuasive but less credible voices. And in some therapy areas in particular, there's such a strong absence of a pharma response. It allows those narratives to actually harden into truths long before any evidence-based messages arrive. Social media, we all criticize social media. We think it's a dangerous platform so much. But the literacy on social media isn't the actual problem. That's just the channel. It's a kind of emotional gullibility. Patients are not stupid. They're just actually, like many of us, driven by emotions. And misinformation tends to do far better at that than any of the information that we or indeed many of our stakeholders supply. The battle for attention over accuracy is going to be the battle of who wins. Thinking that you can simply have better facts, more accurate information, does not mean that you are going to win this fight. you have to think about the entertainment value. You have to think about the virality and the emotional level of content that is being considered here. Anything else, I'm afraid, may make you feel good, but is not good enough. Make some friends. I think that the report did a really good job of ensuring that we understand that pharma is not alone, and countering this misinformation requires allies, maybe even new allies. We need those coalitions. This is obviously to help with trust, but it's also to help with the quality of the message as well. So make some friends, please, everybody. And there's the QR code. If you haven't downloaded it yet, take a picture right now with your phone and make sure that indeed you have. Right, I'm going to end the poll and have a look at the results and also introduce our wonderful panel. Starts with Neka. Neka is from Vive Healthcare, and I absolutely love, Neka, that you are here in the first place because you are willing to speak from a pharma company perspective. And of course, in your role as patient engagement, you clearly see that this is super important. Sorry, I've got a lot on my screen right now, and I can't even see my own slide. Ayesha is Chief Strategy Officer at Havas Links, and as far as I understand, has been a critical person in the creation of the reports. She actually heads communication strategy as well. And of course, you all know Havas Links. It's one of the leading creative agencies within the Havas Health Global Network. And Ayesha's been a strategist for 30 years, leading teams globally. Vernon, someone who I hope he agrees, but I would call a friend. He is someone who I've really enjoyed getting to know over the years for more than a decade now, but he's actually got 25 years of healthcare experience with a passion for digital innovation and is leading, of course, the scientific function as Chief Medical Officer at Havas Links, blending strategy, compliance, and curiosity to reshape our health communications. And David, last but certainly not least, the founder of PM Life Sciences. He's a physician, a health tech investor, co-founder, bridges medicine, policy, innovation, passionate about improving the NHS and helping healthcare companies thrive. And he tackles market access and policy barriers straight on. He's actually a political enthusiast, but also a surgeon with background, and of course wants to make sure that we get the right information. As you can see, a fantastic panel, one that I'm really, really happy. Let's have a look at the poll results. There's quite a lot to get through before we get on to things. Apologies for that. I promise we'll start the discussion part of this soon. So where are we now? How big a threat do you think this is? 55% of you say a major challenge affecting real outcomes. That's obviously the majority, with equal on growing and crushing. Thankfully, none of you think it's overhyped. You probably wouldn't be in this room if you did, but that's still reassuring. What is the level of exposure that you've witnessed in your personal life? I was super interested to find the results of this. As you can see, it's a bit of a normal distribution, level 5 being the highest with a third of the results there. I've reasoned with someone who's been influenced by misinformation, but then it sort of peters off at both ends. But interestingly, nobody really at level 1 or 2. I think that illustrates what I said earlier. This is very mainstream. How confident are you that your company or pharma companies in general truly understand? Well, 41% of you say not confident, but in second place, somewhat. Okay, we're making progress, but we need to make more progress. That's how I see what we're doing. You might also remember that when you signed up for the webinar, there are a couple of questions you actually answered. Let me just quickly show you the results of those. Question 1, which of these do you see as the biggest threat from health information today? Well, you can see the numbers, but what do they mean? Firstly, misleading influences at 34% of the vote. Sorry, I got too much on my screen again. Cherry-picked or distorted data for very closely behind us, 33%. Distrust in experts, 21%. Health hack culture, and then other taking up the rest. Question 2 was what feels like the toughest misinformation challenge for your patients right now? And myths spreading faster than we can correct them was 34%. Patients trusting Dr. Google or social media, 25%. Pharma seen as part of the problem, not the solution. So maybe that inactivity or poor activity taking up a fifth of the vote there. And finally, conflicting data creating confusion rather than clarity. There was, of course, a small amount elsewhere as well. Okay, so I've got through some of the housekeeping. Vernon, I would love to hand to you at this point. There's already been a lot of information, but there is more information, not misinformation, that we need to make sure we're all informed by. So Vernon, if you are able to share slides, I would be very grateful. And if you can turn your video on. Yes, there you are. Marvelous. Oh, we're all turning our videos on. That's good to see. But Vernon, over to you for the moment.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here with you, and lots of encouraging comments I'm very pleased to see in the chat as we go. So can everybody see the slide? So we're going to use this as a basis for then to springboard into the conversation and get into discussions, but it's going to help us really understand some of the nuances and differences as we explore and sort of break down this big challenge, right? Aisha.
Okay. Are you going to hit the slides? Thank you. So every year, the World Economic Forum compiles a global risks report where they rank what the biggest short, medium, and long-term risks are that could negatively impact GDP or population or natural resources. And this year, it's the second year in a row where they have ranked misinformation and disinformation as being the single biggest short-term risk to the world. That's bigger than armed conflict or extreme weather events. And part of the reason for that is because of the sheer number of people that this is impacting globally. And we're also seeing it now as a real health crisis because the outgoing FDA commissioner was on record as saying last year, I think, that health misinformation is now the leading cause of death in the US, and that it surpasses heart disease, it surpasses cancer. And what we know, our best guesstimate of the health-related content that's on social media at the moment is around a third of it contains misinformation or disinformation. So the scale of this is enormous.
So there's two really important factors at play, and we're going to break these down for you. But what the first is a decades-long erosion in trust. Now, whether you know it or not, we're now living in what's called a post-truth era, right? Very dystopian, but fundamentally, there has been an erosion and a degradation in trust in institutions, organizations, political parties. We're going to come on to some of the factors at play. The second aspect is the increasing strain on the health systems, right? So with aging populations, complex disease, challenges with access, and that leads to delays to diagnosis, lag time to get into clinic and hospital. So that disenfranchises, patients. They're not having the expectations that they expect, and so they're looking elsewhere. Now, if we step back a sec and just think about this historically, right? Healthcare was hyperlocal. Your family doctor knew you, Paul, knew your family, your medical history. It was paternalistic, yeah, but it was based entirely on those relationships. And since about World War II, we baked sort of trust in health into institutions. We had the NHS, the World Health Organizations, global health systems really came into play and organized themselves. But more recently, that has been fractured, and we've had scandal upon scandal, from whether it's a financial crash, the opioid crisis. We've had worsening health inequity, again, disenfranchising people. And on top of that, this steady increase in misinformation. So now today, trust doesn't flow sort of top to bottom like it used to. It actually flows sideways. So our patients and healthcare professionals are turning to authentic, credible voices that have shared experiences, right? Their peers a lot of the time. Now, or what they feel are their peers. So what we're seeing is not just a change in preference of communication. What we're seeing is a transformation in the architecture of trust itself.
So the strain on public health systems obviously has happened at the same time as the explosion in the internet, and people are searching for alternative sources of information and support. And the impacts of that are not all negative. For a lot of people, that desire to educate themselves and to take greater control of their own health has led to patients becoming more empowered, becoming much more proactive in their care, taking a much greater part in their own health decisions. The challenge, though, is that you can directly correlate the influence of online health information to reduce trust in HCPs. And what people are not saying is that they no longer trust HCPs at all. What you are seeing, though, is that they are seeing sources that are unverified as being as credible. So this figure, 35%, actually comes from this year's Edelman Trust Barometer, where the 35% of people that they questioned said that if the average person had done some research online, they would be as knowledgeable as a doctor on most health issues.
This is a really important slide. It's important that we actually categorize and understand not all falsehoods are equal. And there's three faces of harmful information. So misinformation, it's very common, but it's well-intended, just factually wrong. We see this all the time in Facebook groups, in Reddit, patient forums, and these sorts of things. People are sharing anecdotal remedies with some well-meaning, some good intent. It's just not evidence-based. The second is a different beast, right? The second, disinformation. This is deliberate deception for gain or for influence. This is intentional lies to mislead and profit, to manipulate rhetoric and ideology. It's deep fakes, mimicking famous people, famous medical expertise, promoting false, fake products. The third type is quite malicious and insidious, and this is malinformation. This is where a true piece of information is cherry-picked and taken out of context. It's weaponized truth. We see it often in environments like anti-vaccine influencers, cherry-picking some real stats to falsely imply cause of mass deaths, right, without actually framing it in terms of risk or other comorbidities or confounding factors. So intent in the digital world really matters, right? So we touch on social media, and this is a critical component of this. And shareability is the driving force behind that, but not from factual information. It's about emotional engagement, right? We're all emotional creatures, even Paul, right? So an MIT study recently reiterated and sort of reaffirmed this. It was a great piece of research that basically showed that falsehood would be shared much, much faster, 6 times faster than factually correct information, reaching many more people. And it wasn't bots sharing it. It was humans, right? And the other factor at play here is we'd hope in an environment where we're democratizing ideas and evidence that they should be competing freely, right? But we live in a world of emotionally powered driven algorithms, right? So we know that extreme thoughts and beliefs and ideas that gain emotional engagement and traction and are contentious drive far higher up the algorithmic the servicing of the algorithms, and therefore they are served a distorted a view of public opinion. So we know that it muffles the views of the majority, and we see much more discord and sensationalism really at scale, right? And of course, tech is part and parcel of this, right? In an ideal world, AI would be a perfect steward for HCPs to get the right evidence they need at the right time, and they would steward people, public and patients alike, to the right information. The facts of the matter is AI can, at an industrial scale, create fake information, mimicking voices of authority at the touch of a button, generating fake evidence, studies, articles, posts, etc., which is then fed back into the system, of course, which are, again, those engagement-driven algorithms. And so it creates this hyper extreme cycle of amplification. And, at the end of the day, some of our own research showed some really interesting disconnects. So members of the public were telling us, using our point 1 research, that 50% of them were using AI to upload blood results, images, ask for second opinions, right? At the same time, almost the same, 44%, said they didn't trust those tools. So there's disconnects here between intent and action.
And the huge growth in activity in the online health category is also being driven by and attracting a lot of money into the sector. So the rate of growth is phenomenal. At the beginning of this decade, digital on health economy was worth around 167 billion US. By the end of the decade, it's estimated it's going to be worth over $1 trillion. And within digital health, misinformation is a multi-billion-dollar, and it's a very sophisticated industry. And there's a number of ways in which it is monetized. One of the big ones is donations. That's direct financial contributions. That can be anything from cash, stock, shares, bequests in wills. It's a very significant revenue stream for individuals and for groups who disseminate information. There was a study recently that found that 85% of anti-vaccination websites showed some attempt to monetize their activity through donations. But there's also lots of other ways of doing this. Platform monetization, lots of social media platforms will directly compensate content creators based on metrics like views and watch time and overall engagement. And that's a business model that incentivizes emotionally charged content because it has high viral potential. The challenge, of course, is that there's no online verification of the healthcare credentials for social media accounts and influencers. So if you're a successful influencer in that environment, what you can do is you can become very, very adept at spreading misinformation. Then there's product sales. Now, that's a revenue stream that can convert audience trust directly into buy now. And particularly what you're seeing is with the growth of the health and wellness category is the connection through to natural remedies, untested remedies, untried remedies as an alternative to what your doctor might be offering you. And then finally, there's advertising revenue, where what happens is you are buying into a website because it has high footfall. And that is where things like clickbait, fake news, etc., become very important because those are the things that attract that level of footfall. But apart from money, there is also power. And what we're seeing from our research is that around half of HCPs think that misinformation is very common from governments, particularly at the moment, although this has been going on for some time. Cambridge Analytica popularised it in the UK. We've seen, going back to the Cold War, we saw the KGB with Operation Denver spreading misinformation about HIV and AIDS to undermine the US. And at the moment, we are seeing a lot of misinformation around vaccines in the US, and we're seeing it around the assisted dying bill in the UK.
So this is, as Paul said, absolutely an epidemic. Now, some groups are disproportionately hit harder, and it will be no surprise to anybody on this call, I suspect, who they might be. So health literacy is a fundamentally challenging topic here, where twice as many are more likely to have had regret over health-related decisions than those people with higher levels of health literacy. Now, there are also vulnerable groups, those that are particularly stigmatized or marked by conditions where there's limited treatment options are particularly vulnerable to these sorts of exploits. And so those we see much higher rates in certain conditions, such as sexually transmitted diseases or those with a social stigma associated. Minority groups. 41% of LGBTQ plus patients stated that they had been harmed by taking advice from non-professional sources, right? And that was significantly more than their counterparts from other groups. So it's, again, the most vulnerable in society who are being the most harmed. Now, we work here, and you, the audience, work across multiple therapy areas and have multiple brands and multiple exposures to different settings, and all of them are at risk. So when you look at the levels of anxiety or difficulty navigating the environment on the left-hand side that patients and publics are finding, and then you look at the right-hand side with the impact that it is having on them and their personal experience, you can see that these are significant issues.
It's the last slide of our section, Paul. But what you can see is that across a wide range of therapy areas, misinformation, conflicting information is being felt at every stage, from diagnosis, where people are going online to find alternative diagnoses for what their condition might be, through to discussions about treatment, through to dosage, adherence, treatment plans. At every stage of that journey, they're finding alternative voices, generally in the online space, to listen to. And of course, that inevitably has a knock-on effect on everything from disease progression and long-term efficacy through to the mental health and even the overall survival rates in some cases. So at every point, we're seeing its impact.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Can I just say, amazing leadership from Havas Links and from the both of you. You didn't have to do this, but you have informed us and you have influenced in a good way us and our industry. And I think that so many of us should be grateful for what you've done here, bringing this to the fore when it was perhaps risky to do so. So I think it's time to bring the rest of the panel in. Please make sure your cameras are on and you join me here on stage. Thank you, Nyeka. Thank you, David. I'm also just launching a poll as we speak. I want to get a few more polls done, and we're halfway through our webinar here. As we move from, the challenge to the solution. And so you can see that this poll is a two-parter all about the reaction. But while you're doing that, Nyeka and David, I just want to hear from you, your reaction to the facts and slightly frightening condition that we find ourselves in today, and how you see the challenge from your perspective, given where you are, working for a pharma company. Just give us it from your perspective. Nyeka, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. Thanks very much. And I agree that it is quite scary. And I speak from the point of view of both somebody who works for a pharma company, but also someone who practices as a physician, because misinformation is, I think, rife in both of those spheres. From the point of view of my experience at working for pharma, so I work for an HIV pharmaceutical company, Vive Healthcare, and there's a lot of misinformation around HIV itself, treatments for it, whether or not there might be a cure, that are based, I think, in the distrust that many people have about pharma, whether this mistrust is valid or not. So, for example, many of you will know that HIV is not curable, but there is very, very effective treatment that allows people to live a normal life expectancy, to not transmit HIV to their sexual partners, for example, or to their children. But there is a lot of research going on into a cure. But a lot of people that I speak to in my clinical practice and also in my work in patient engagement will say, there is a cure. We know there's a cure, but pharma companies are hiding the fact that there's a cure, because once it's out that there's a cure, they won't make any money. So it's not in their interests to tell us that there's a cure or to promote it or to promote one. And in my work as a clinician, although we now have very effective treatments that are not as unpleasant to take, for example, as earlier ones, there are still people who are very reluctant to take treatment because they don't believe that treatment works, and they don't believe that HIV can be treated. And I've had people die as a consequence of the fact that they are in forums where people are talking about the fact that there is no effective treatment for HIV. How do you counter this? And that's kind of what we're talking about today.
Thank you, Nyeka. I really appreciate your perspective. David.
Yeah, I'd like to echo your thanks to Ben and Aisha for publishing this and at a really important time. I think we have seen, and there's a comment in the chat that this isn't just a social media issue. We have seen this sort of collapse in trust in authority, this sort of collapse in belief in expertise, I guess, driven by politics and politicians over the last little while. And so we live in a world where people communicate increasingly in very small sound bites. We are creating, I was reading somewhere, we publish the same volume of material now 8 times a day, as was published before 2003. So there's a huge amount of stuff out there. It's all very, very simple, very targeted towards quick reactions. And I think that's a general trend. And so the question, I think, is how, and we'll discuss this, I think, how do we match that communication style? How do we build understanding of communicating truth, communicating fact in an effective way that resonates with a modern audience? And I don't think we do that very well as an industry. So I was head of publications communication at Pfizer for a while, and I was blown away by the fact that the average person has a vocabulary of about 15,000 words. You learn about 9,000 words if you study a language at university level. But if you study medicine, you add about 20,000 words to your vocabulary. So this is a huge challenge about communicating ideas simply when there's a whole language that we speak that others don't. And I think we'll get into lots of sort of solutions, but I think I see that being the major challenges. We've got to communicate simply in a language that other people speak.
Well, just before we get on to solutions, can I just hear also from you, Nika and David, what's your level of confidence that we are going to be able to address this as an industry? You've both got experience in pharma companies. Before we even talk about what the solutions are, do you feel that this is something that we can actually do? And, you know, if you were not to exist, how would the industry fare without you? What's your level of confidence?
I am fairly confident that we can do something about it. I don't know. I don't think that it'll ever be possible to completely get rid of misinformation, because I think that there's something about being human that kind of misinformation, the two things sort of go together. But I don't think pharma can do it on its own. I do think it has to be a collaborative effort. I agree with David about the fact that language has to change, that there is something about the people who peddle misinformation that is very attractive about the words they use and the emotions that they try to generate. And to a certain extent, we perhaps have to do better to match that sort of style, because it clearly resonates. I think that there's also something about the people who are speaking, and that there is still this idea that things that come out of pharma may be inherently, or may have an inherent amount of untruth to them. So there was something in the report that said something to the effect that 1 in 5 millennial HCPs don't trust pharma branded websites. So, you know, is the way that pharma tackles this, should the direction, and we're not talking about solutions just now, but should we be maybe moving away from having something that has the name of a pharma website on it if we want people to believe it? And who do we need to collaborate with, whose voices people listen to, in order to make sure that our message is heard?
Thank you, Nika. So moving into solutions, but David, just before we do, any reaction from you have, or confidence level, shall we say?
Confidence level. So I think if you take it as a binary, things are terrible and we'll fix it and this won't ever be a problem again, then of course not. For me, the question is, how do we minimize harm from misinformation? That's a much more useful question. And I think we've had this problem throughout history with quack remedies. I mean, it's not a new phenomenon. So the question is really fundamentally how we build systems that communicate evidence and information in a way that's trustworthy, so that the maximum number of people get the best health outcomes that they possibly can. That for me is a much more interesting question. And I absolutely am confident that we can do that and we can build that. I think Nick is right, it will require collaboration with lots of people other than just pharma.
But it will require, as I said at the beginning, an understanding of behavioral science, an understanding of emotional connection, not just accuracy and infallibility, if you like. That for me is the question that I find myself somewhat perturbed by. When I go to a pharma company, I say, how many people in this room are experts in behavioral science? I don't get any hands go up. And that to me is still frightening, frankly, when we deal in a very human industry. So I've clicked share results on the poll that we've just done. And Vernon and Aisha, before I go through the results, any reaction to what you heard from Nicker and David?
Vernon?
Do you want to, so we're going to get onto the systems play in a second, which is fantastic. Thank you for setting that up beautifully, David. I'm hugely encouraged by some of the comments out there as well. The thing about the psychology is about relationships. We've spent too long pushing information around and hoping it would stick to people and not really being centric to the audience and who they value and don't value. And that's the part. We've got some really interesting learnings that we can. So Necker, somebody I knew that was in the States during COVID, went on a real mission to try and debunk some of the misinformation, particularly for people of color, but was seen as part of the problem because they worked in the hospital. So they had to partner with grassroots individuals in a number of different ways, and those are the sorts of things that we absolutely need to maximize and use and bring to the fore. So we're going to use a really simple framework that some smarter people than us came up with to help us to tackle this. And to David's point, it is about a systems play here, right? And actually, we don't have to do everything ourselves. When you get into this, it starts becoming quite depressing, right? We all become a bit nihilistic about the end of the world, right? But actually, there are loads of brilliant things happening out there if we can help stitch them together, join them together, and collectively help each other. This is about a collective play, right? And it used to be okay to do nothing. PR crisis management was, take the oxygen out of the room, don't get into an argument, and it'll go away. This is not the case. This is a perma environment, right? A perma crisis of misinformation. So we have to step up and act. So while I bring Aisha, you can add while I just
yeah, I'm also loving some of the things that Paul is saying about behavioral science and so on. I read an interesting statistic the other day that most normal people will use system 2 thinking around 5% of the time, and system 1 thinking, which is fast and intuitive and emotional, about 95% of the time. With HCPs, it's more like 70-30. So HCPs do tend to think, more logically and more in longhand, if you like. But even then, 70% of the time, you're still using those emotional shortcuts and so on. So we have to just get better at translating what we do every day into the language that most people are buying into in this online space.
So, as I mentioned, the Alan Turing Institute have come up with a really sensible strategic framework that breaks it down very, very simply. 3 C's. They talk about counsel. So this is about educating the general public and HCPs. And we know from our research, 70% of HCPs think this is one of the most important things to raise awareness, okay? And 6 out of 10 patients we spoke to are begging us for better health literacy, better health information, and navigating who to trust and who not to trust. They teach this in schools in Finland to teenagers, right? How to trust sources. We can scale that.
The second bit, which is curb, is actually a little bit trickier because some of this does rely on working with the platforms, but there is actually a great deal that platforms can do and that they have been doing in slightly different areas. But, impacting the publishers of misinformation by demonetizing, delisting, blocking content is something that we can work with platforms to do. But we can also, I think, work with platforms to take much more positive tactics. And there are things that, for example, the Vaseline brand has been doing lately, where what they do is they work with content creators to verify the content that's been put out there. So if we have HCPs who are out creating content, health content? Do we work with Meta to create some sort of simple health check, so that you can check on people's health credentials, the ones who are talking to you? Or do you create some sort of trust pilot for health influencers, so that those who are really serious about providing a service for people are signing up and taking a pledge that the information that they are providing is something that you can trust?
So the other end of the spectrum, from counselling and sort of pre-bunking, so warning people that things are, might be misinformation. The other end is to correct it, to debunk it at that point of interaction. So, providing pharmacists with a misinformation debunking component for them to give at the point of prescription, to correct things, to actually stick our neck out, maybe, let's be provocative, and actually debunk and fact-check things in real life. The example I spoke of earlier was a perfect example of grassroots co-production and co-development, right? Co-creation. There's lovely examples out there where barbershops were used to debunk information and engage the community around seeing healthcare professionals. Men are very stoic, they don't go to their doctors, around weight, diabetes, cardiovascular health. So they are already many trusted environments at a local or international level, and we need to lean into them more. Again, this is about amplifying what people do. The advocacy groups do amazing work, right? But they often do it in silo around certain therapy areas. This is a theme that cuts across. So again, we have our certain focus areas, sure, for certain brands, but actually it's in our interests to benefit each other in this place, right? So we don't have to just be tackling something in a silo, but actually breaking it down more, to David's point, at a systems level. It's a nice, simple framework to start thinking about how we, as marketeers or medical affairs teams, can actually, or advocacy teams, can turn up and do things proactively. I'm going to put that back down again and get back with the rest of you.
Thank you. Thank you. So really great leadership once again in helping us really understand the direction to go. I'm super curious in the panel's responses to that, but I'm also interested in the audience responses as indeed we start focusing on solutions and ways forward. We have to feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel here, as indeed we said earlier. So Nick and David, what response to what you've just heard?
Yeah, so I think something that really resonated with me there was about counselling. I think by the time you've got an explosion of misinformation and fear, it's probably already a little bit too late. I think there's something. So whenever I launched a medicine, I used to think very early on, what's going to stop this medicine getting to patients? Because those are the things I need to fix in my launch plan, right? So it's reimbursement, are there side effects that are going to be problematic? Is the system set up to deal with the volume of patients coming through? Is this a rare disease that's suddenly going to become common because you extend life expectancy, whatever? Maybe we need to think, as we do that journey, we need to add to that the question of what is going to be the misinformation that comes out? What is going to be the objection from public and on social media? We maybe need to reframe our thinking. We've always thought, what's the objection going to be from healthcare professionals? But as we move into a world where patients want much more control and say over how they are treated, I think the question has to become not just what's going to stop HCPs prescribing it, but what's going to stop patients wanting to receive the medicine. And I think that's a big mindset shift for industry.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. Some positive and solution-oriented words there as well. Neka, keen to hear your response, but also I've asked one more poll. This is directly addressing what pharma's counter strategy is, so keen to see your answers there. Neka.
Agree very much with what David's just said. I wanted to just go back to the needing to be company scientists, just very briefly, because I'd like to challenge it very slightly from the point of view of the fact that the majority of people who peddle misinformation are not behavioral scientists. but they manage to be very successful without having any kind of qualification in behavioral science. So I think before we decide that we have to go down the path of qualifying in another area, perhaps we might think about that a little bit. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was the point that Vernon made when he was talking about the three areas that we could try to use as the framework for countering misinformation. And one of the things that I've heard from community groups that I speak to is we're aware of this misinformation, but we don't have enough information to counter it. So how can we work with you to create tools to be able to provide information to the people that we are advocates for and the communities into which we go, so that we can talk to people about what's right, talk to people about medicines and about all the sorts of medicines that there are, about the impact that they have, but also about issues that are related to HIV and living with HIV as a whole, that people just don't have information about. Because I think we make the assumption that people living with the condition know everything that there is to know about it, but the reality is that they don't necessarily. And how can we, in a compliant way, work with communities to help them to obtain the information that they need?
Absolutely. We have only got 7 minutes left. Time flies when you're having fun. I don't know if fun's the right word here, but certainly it's been a super interesting conversation so far. I would love for each of the panel members, and I include Vernon and Aisha in this, to help us prioritize. There are, as we've just seen, a range of different things that we could and perhaps should be doing. But what would you argue is the Monday morning action that you would want to put above all else? In fact, if you were CEO of a pharmaceutical company, what would be your action to try and take some leadership position here as the primary focus that you would do? And I realize that's going to be just like people are complaining in the poll. It's hard to choose one thing, right? But by forcing you to choose one, I hope it helps us focus the mind. So yeah, I realize you probably all want 10 minutes to think about that, but I'm just not going to let that happen, am I? So what would you do, CEO of the company, Monday morning, action, priority?
I can go first. I think doing nothing isn't an option. I think monitoring what's happening in the social space when people are discussing the products that we're making, the treatments that are out there, is critical. Knowing what is going on is one great step towards it. And I'm completely with David that we need to jump in and start being proactive and counselling early to get ahead of a crisis before it starts happening.
And just while you're there, Aisha, do you want to answer Nick's point about how we don't necessarily need to be behavioural scientists?
Yeah, I think that's a longer conversation, but I think behavioral science is really about understanding why are some of those things more attractive than others, and why are they going viral, whereas our information isn't. I think we need to know that. We need to understand it.
Excellent. Who's next?
I'm going to pick up on. Actually, I'm going to echo the comments somebody on the chat. I think we have to be bolder about these things. People do not respond well to large corporations hidden behind organizations at arm's length and distance, and sending a press release out 3 months later about something is just irrelevant. I think there's two levels. I think there's actually sticking our neck and heads above the parapet about doing something societally valuable that's about public awareness and raising awareness. And I think at a more manageable level within therapy areas, there's lots of things medical affairs and marketeers can do to be targeted with their approach. So they don't have to tackle, I think you should tackle both, but you can spread it within the organization. And I think that's part of the problem. Nobody's taking ownership of it, right? So actually you could do it on the corporate side on one side, or on the medical above brand on one side, and then the marketeers tackle something very specific that's easier for them. So we play to those strengths, but actually it's unethical. It makes no business sense. Your medicines are not going to get the adoption that we need, and society is going to suffer and continue to suffer if we don't. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Mic drop moment there, Vernon. Thank you. Just before we go to Aneka and David, I've closed that poll so you can see the results there. What would make the biggest difference in ensuring farmers' messages are more resilient? This is what the audience says. So 24% making scientific data emotionally resonant is the winner, but actually quite a broad spread, I would say, of answers. No super clear-cut winner there. So clearly, a lot of things is the real answer to that. Second one, what should success look like? So, you know, this is almost how do we measure ourselves? How do we make sure we've gained stronger patient trust and more engagement with credible sources are the winners there. So interesting responses. So Neka and David, you've basically got the final word in our last couple of minutes here.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go. I think thinking to the question about being CEO on Monday morning, I think the first thing one has to do is to bring the organization with them. And I think we do have to acknowledge that there are people within our organizations who don't necessarily believe the things that we believe. And understanding that they may not be willing to disclose that they don't believe those things if they feel that they're in the minority, but they certainly exist. I know people in organizations that I work in who are anti-vaxxers. So I think thinking about the majority, I think we have to have a situation. So if I were the CEO, I would talk to the organization and say, this is an issue. How do we think we can solve it as an organization and get people in their different teams to think about how they might go about doing it? And then we can then, I guess, adopt some of those solutions ourselves as an organization if we think that they are worth, that they are likely to be successful, and start from there, but do it as an organization as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Some motivating words and some people in the comments talking about how this is motivating them too. David.
I've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to have to be pithy and say something
profound, yes,
memorable and
yeah.
Profound. What I would say is, I think in a world of self-regulation, I think we can probably do much more already than we really believe we can. I think I would stop being frightened. I think I'd communicate openly, transparently, and effectively. I think I'd spend much more time doing it in a human way, and I'd think much more carefully about how we produce communication that's written in a plain language way. Think much more carefully about plain language summaries. That's what I would do.
Be real, I think, is my way of summarizing what you're saying, David, if I may be so.
A little bit.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think it's a good moment to finish the conversation on. So you can see I've done a final next steps poll, so make sure you answer that as well. You also see, if you're looking at the chat window, that the team at Havas Links have graciously given us 5 slots in their calendars. Whatever you want to discuss about this, but if you want to take the conversation further, the agenda is yours. So if you are interested in taking one of those 5 slots, please do let me know. I can see a couple of people have just written yes in the thing there. And I just want to say a enormous, like not even just a thank you, but a sort of bow down type thank you, if I may, because this is killing people unless we do better. And the fact that so many of us remain silent and you all chose not to actually makes me sleep better at night, that's for sure. And this is the kind of work I would love to see our industry doing much more of. It's so rare that we see anyone taking a leadership position on this in our industry. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So guys, thank you massively. And I include, by the way, of course, everyone in the audience. I didn't know if the chat window was going to be popular today or if people would, sit on their hands. And I think we've had a nice discussion, some really good sentiments in there. Please do let us know if there's anything that you think we should do to follow up on this conversation or do next, any further topics that you think we should cover. Write them down. I'm going to hold this window open for a couple more minutes. But for now, I want to respect all of your time. Make sure you can get to your next meeting, as I'm sure it's pressing already. And once again, massive thank you, especially to the Havas Links team, but also Neka and David for sharing so much today. It's been a really great moment. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you.